My name is Lincoln Shurtz, and I oversee the legislative efforts for the Association of Counties. Just as a little bit of background, Adam plucked me from the Utah League of Cities and Towns. I was the lobbyist for the League of Cities and Towns for 15 years and just moved over to UAC to represent UAC on their legislative issues about 3 months ago. So relatively new in the UAC capacity, but certainly been on Capitol Hill for quite some time. Our team's pretty broad. Ari Vandegraff, who's going to be talking next, works with the association as well, helps me track bills and works on specific pieces of legislation that we kind of push in his direction. Doug certainly helps with the communications effort, which is imperative to kind of some of our success and what we do as counties in terms of being effective on Capitol Hill. As we go up and try and work with the legislature, probably our primary focus and the biggest thing that we bring to the table is the ability to motivate and activate you as county commissioners, elected officials, sheriffs, whatever the issue may be, is getting you motivated in those specific areas and making sure that you're contacting your individual legislators on issues that are important to the county. We'll talk about some of the county issues that we're going to be focusing on this year as well. I want to also introduce Steve Hunter if he wants to come up. Steve Hunter is a contract lobbyist that works with Weber County, has also worked with Salt Lake County. And the reason I wanted to bring Steve up is Steve also works with individual counties. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is how we work as an association, as well as how we bring in contract lobbyists to work on specific issues for specific counties. So before we get into our individual rows, what I wanted to talk about is just a little bit of flavor of the legislature. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have worked with the legislature to date? Is there many of you? I know there's a few. Okay, so not too many. Maybe give you a little idea of what the legislature looks like. We're quickly approaching the legislative session. I think we're about 72, 73 days away from the beginning of the session. Starts in mid-January and runs through March. It's 45 days long by the state constitution, and that includes weekends and holidays. So with those holidays and weekends, they technically only work about 32 days. In those 32 days, they'll debate and look at over 1,000 pieces of legislation and balance a $13 billion budget. So as you can imagine, things are moving very fast. As you look at 1,000 bills going through in 30 days, if you do the quick math, that's several bills every single day that are just flying through committees and flying through the floor process. And the reason we're here is to help you monitor that process. On a typical year, the association is tracking about 100 to 150 pieces of legislation that would affect the different offices within county government. And that's a lot to track as it's going through the process. So what we're here to do is both provide information, provide staff guidance based on kind of our history with the legislature, and utilize some of the local resources such as Gavin and others who have kind of deep expertise in these issues to understand the implications of legislation that's moving forward. Anything you want to add on kind of the just nature of the process?
No, I mean, it's something that I think that we could get engaged in a whole lot more vigorously up there as counties, and there's a lot of work that we could put on. We could use a perspective as we sort of get involved more with the issues that we're going to have from you guys. I think mostly we need to hear feedback constantly so we can be more effective on the Hill.
And we're going to be changing our process a little bit this year and trying to get information out to you sooner so that we can get feedback on legislation. The big piece is making sure that we understand the implications. What's hard for us as staff, to a certain extent sitting in Salt Lake City, is to understand how a certain piece of legislation is going to affect Millard County or Beaver County. But you can certainly help us with that guidance. So some of the tools that we use are the communications tools to try get this information out. Make sure you're signing up for Doug's email blasts. Make sure you're checking our website. Make sure you're checking the legislative news that we'll be sending out on a daily basis. That's our only way to kind of effectively get the information out to you. If you're not checking it and getting back to us, it's hard for us to understand how these bills are going to affect your individual communities. So again, sign up for those things on the UAC website and make sure you're paying close attention for those 45 days so that you can inform us on things that we need to be tracking. Some of the things we'll be working on this year kind of range, and they're broad. UAC tries to stay broad in scope and focusing on issues that will affect more than just a single county. So kind of the difference between a contract lobbyist and the association is the contract lobbyist will work on specific issues. So if County X had an appropriation that they were looking for a specific project within their county, or there was a bill that specifically affected that county, oftentimes they'll bring in a contract lobbyist to work on those issues. Whereas the association lobbyists will more focus on things that broadly affect counties in general. So there was a question earlier about centrally assessed property tax valuation. If they change the law in the valuation process, that's going to affect all 29 counties. So that's something the association will take on. Last year, Steve worked on an appropriation for Weber County for a gun range in Weber County. That's typically not something the association will be advocating for, but something that, again, contract lobbyists are brought in. How we also use the contract lobbyists, once they join our ranks, if you will, is if there is an issue that is kind of broad in scope, we'll include them in those dialogues as well so that we can maximize their relationships, that what they have with legislators, and kind of bring them in to help us, if you will, block and tackle the 104 legislators during the session. Anything to add there?
Particularly in the social services, human services side of things, over the years, as I've done work for Salt Lake County and a lot for Weber County, I've worked with Adam a lot on getting the funding where it needs to go in specific areas of the counties, and that's been a broader issue that I've dealt with as a contract lobbyist for a specific county, but helped UAC overall. And I think as a contract lobbyist, there's several counties that have contract lobbyists. I think it's important for you guys to understand that we're available to you as a resource as well, to answer questions, to pick our brain on things, whatever you need. I think it's important for you to know that we're available for you.
And we'll provide a list of who the contract lobbyists are that are working for specific counties so that you have a list of not only who's working on the UAC staff, but also folks that are also engaged, if you will, in the broader county battles up at the Hill. So as I've described the process, you probably get that there's some acrimony between the legislature and counties. I don't think that's necessarily the case. There's obviously that kind of healthy tension that exists at times, especially on the budgeting issues. But at the same token, there's great partnerships that can be gained up there at the legislature. This last year, we were able to work with some technology companies, Adobe in particular, where we were able to work with the legislature on appropriating several $1 million for a program to allow for digital form conversion for forms within your community. So you can digitize these forms versus having paper forms. The legislature agreed to that sponsorship, provided money to the counties to initiate that program. So there's these great opportunities that exist, but at the same token, there's obviously some natural tension as we provide services on behalf of the state, especially in the social and behavioral health standpoint. So what does UAC do? First and foremost, if you haven't noticed, we identified the bills that will likely affect counties and get that information out to you. We meet with bill sponsors, meet with the relevant committee members that oversee our issues. We lobby legislative leadership and the general membership, and obviously are engaged in the floor debates and kind of the, if you will, the grassroots of motivating and getting you contacting your local elected officials on issues that are going to be important to the county. So you'll be hearing a lot of me over the next several months. By the end of the session, most of you are probably tired of hearing my voice and talking about these issues, and so we try and leave you alone as much as possible during the interim period. But that's the basic process. In a typical legislative session, there's probably 10 or so issues that we're proactively pushing. So these are bills that we're actually initiating to change the law. The rest of those bills, the other 90 or so, are in reaction to what the legislature is bringing forward. So again, there will be other political interests on Capitol Hill pushing issues, or specific legislators that have a gripe with Community X or Community Y and bring forward some legislation that we will then respond to. What we need from you, the biggest thing is your guidance. We need you engaged in the process. UAC puts together a legislative policy committee that meets weekly during the legislative session. We encourage you all to participate in that, so again, you can understand kind of at the grassroots level what's happening and what we're working on, and can provide guidance at those weekly meetings. In addition, we obviously have the communication tools I've talked about. Meeting with your legislators and establishing that relationship is probably first and foremost. If you don't know who your legislators are, please get to know them. Please start to build that relationship now. They will be invaluable when the legislature comes into session and you need to reach out. It's great to already have those relationships in place. Anything there?
Yeah, I think specifically the federal delegation as well. I mean, they look to you guys so much for input, and as newly elected county officials, I think you'll realize that more. And Bill Lee can testify to this. I think that the federal delegation relies so much more on you than they do any other electeds in the state, and that's something to be really cognizant of as well.
Especially when it comes to public lands issues, there's a whole host of issues going on with monument designation, designation of endangered species, a whole host of issues that we care about as counties that are specifically geared at the federal government. So ramping up our federal effort is going to be something that we really focus on as well. So some issues we're looking at this year that I just wanted you to be aware of. I certainly won't go into detail. I know after 5 hours of hearing people drone on, you're probably tired of these voices coming. Valuation dispute up in Box Elder County. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude of this issue. It's going to be a very, very big issue for all counties throughout the state. Another big issue, it's an identified $11.3 billion shortfall in transportation funding. About a third of that, just over $3 billion, is city and county needs that have been identified by the legislature. We're working actively with the business community and any other interest groups on promoting ways in which we can kind of bridge the gap of the $11 billion that we've identified in transportation funding needs. Those needs extend out to 2040, but the longer we wait, the more expensive those needs get as preservation and maintenance of our facilities continues to diminish because of resources available. Well, we're trying to push those resources up. Corrections reform is a huge issue, and kind of a couple of those work together. So there's a corrections reform, prison relocation, and sentencing reform legislation that talks about the whole sentencing and corrections package that we have. And counties, as you can imagine, with the county jail system, are integral to the corrections dynamic that exists in Utah. So we're paying very close attention to how corrections will be modified this year, what sentencing guideline changes will be recommended, and what happens with the prison relocation. As the state relies heavily on county jails for much of the prison population, what does the relocation of the prison mean to the jail contracting that takes place in many of your counties? So it's a big issue for us. Medicaid funding. As the providers of health and human services, Medicaid funding is a huge issue. You're required to match several of the federal dollars that come down at the local level. So the match requirements of counties and trying to get the state to bridge some of those county match requirements is another big funding issue that we'll be watching this year. Additionally, there has been some discussion of carving, what they call carving in social and behavioral health, which means taking that out of the purview of the counties and instead giving that to either the state or the accountable care organizations. There's a huge discussion as to how to do that, when to do it, when's it appropriate, when is it not appropriate. We're actively engaged in that discussion as well. A ton of election issues. There are every year. We continue to track election issues, noticing requirements, things of that nature. As I mentioned earlier, public lands is a big issue, and then water issues. There's going to be two significant water bills this year, one dealing with use and kind of water forfeiture law. The other issue is dealing with the designation of navigable waters. And what this essentially means is, when do you have some sort of federal overlay to land use decisions you made based on the water that exists in your county. So those are the issues. You can see they're big, heavy issues that we're going to be tackling this year. We'd certainly love your input. If there's anything I can hope you take from this, is not to take in all the information and be an expert on legislation. That's why you hire us. But we'd certainly want you involved, and know that there's a resource out there that you can call. If you have questions about legislation, you can get in touch with us, and if we don't know the answers, we can certainly point you in the right direction. So do you have anything to add? And then I'll go to you, Gavin.
No, I think that it's imperative for you to understand the power that you have as elected officials with the State House and State Senate. You can communicate with these guys over the next couple of months and really make a difference on some of these things that are, I mean, some of these might not be as big issues as we think they're going to be right now, but some others might pop up, and your voice is extremely important to these elected people in this legislature, and we're going to rely on you a lot to help with that.
The one good thing we have going for us is we have several former county elected officials that are now serving the state legislature. So they understand our issues, they understand what it means to be in local government and have boots on the ground, understand what it means to be at the ground level on many of these issues. So we've got some great natural allies in the legislature, but it does take the cooperation of us working with you and kind of motivating us all to come up to the legislature and make sure that they understand how these issues will impact their community. So with that, Gavin, sounds like you have a question. Certainly. So the affiliate organizations essentially provide guidance to us on issues that are specific to their affiliate group. We rely heavily on the various affiliates to get direction on issues that they're interested in. So if it's on corrections issues, we certainly look towards the prosecutors and the sheriff's affiliate groups to get guidance as to how we need to handle those issues. Social and behavioral health, we rely on UBIC and the behavioral health community to help us with those issues. Obviously, the county commissions and councils give us general and broad direction on several of these issues. The public works groups are helping us on transportation issues and just basic utility issues. So we rely heavily on working with your affiliates to get our direction on priorities that we need to be putting forward for the next legislative session. And we work closely with the leadership of those groups to make sure that those priorities come forward in UAC priorities. So please work closely with your affiliates as well to make sure those come forward. One thing we're still trying to figure out, as I'm relatively new to this, is how do we come to consensus when there's conflict between various affiliate groups. And so that's something we're going to be talking about over the kind of the next year and through the annual conferences, just making sure there are times in which one affiliate group doesn't agree with another affiliate group. Who wins in those circumstances, and what position should UAC take in those sorts of circumstances? So that's something, if you have some ideas, guidance, input there, certainly let us know so that we can kind of put that into the rubric as we're trying to figure out how to move forward as well. So there's another question here. Yes? We're largely going to rely on the Legislative Policy Committee. During the legislative session, the one thing you have to understand is over 45 days, bills are being amended not only on a daily basis, but on an hourly basis. So we get the general direction from our Legislative Policy Committee. We work really closely with our Board of Directors to make sure that as things change on the fly, we as staff are still carrying out the wishes of both the Board of Directors for UAC as well as the affiliate groups. And then we come back on a weekly basis to check in and make sure that that direction is consistent with the kind of overall policy of the Legislative Policy Committee. Any other questions? Yes. The league is not an affiliate group, so they're an independent organization that just represents the cities. Any other questions? All righty. Thank you. Hopefully we got back on time. Work for you guys. Mr. Troop.